is looking at how road safety contributes to mode shift. So I'll talk you through some of the backgrounds behind the research, what we did, and then I'll go hopefully into some interesting case studies, which I think are interesting. Hopefully you will feel the same way. I don't think we're going to spend the full amount of time this afternoon. I don't think 2 hours is quite what we'll do, but we'll go through, and as questions come up, you can either jump in or leave them to the end. I'm pretty flexible on that side of things, but there are 28 slides to get through, so there's a fair bit of content. So in terms of some of the context to why we're looking at this, most of the people on the call probably already on board with it, but our governance and funding, our GPS in Aotearoa New Zealand, intends to enable better travel options. So how can we achieve a transport system that contributes to livable cities and towns by providing people with good travel options? So that's the whole transport system. Doesn't matter whether it's roads, rail, public transport, walking and cycling, all of the routes working together in harmony. Beautiful. Road to Zero is an incredibly good strategy for our road safety within Aotearoa New Zealand. Action number 6 in particular relates to this. That's the join or connection. So improving road safety makes our towns and cities more accessible, connected, livable, ensuring people feel safe to walk and cycle. So it's getting into that side of things. So making sure our initiatives that include safety infrastructure treatment, safer speeds, improving safety and access to footpaths, bike lanes, cycleways, all of that's built in to our safety initiatives. And then healthy and safe people and inclusive access. So what? What's the outcome? So our land transport benefit frameworks cover off not only safety in terms of our objective injury data, but also it captures perceived safety and personal security in that, and that's important to the context of what I'll talk through today around sort of a wider approach to how we enable our safer journeys, get people there safely, get people home safe. And then into inclusive access as well, how this impacts on mode choice, giving us choice, and also user experience. So some of the metrics we look at around that become quite important to this work. So I love this quote from one of our interviews as part of this. So we've made speed safer for drivers of cars, and that has been the focus. But we were not doing this for other modes. If I step out my door, I should be safe. If I step out my door, I should be safe. I really love that. Just put it simply, that's why we're doing this work. That's what we want. So a wider approach for safe journeys. So we did have to look at which safety interventions could lead to mode shift away from the car. So that refined what we looked at down quite a bit. And by mode shift, we looked at true mode shift away from car, like one going up, one going down. But we also did include studies that just increased trips for public transport, walking, cycling. Within safer journeys, what we've included within our definition of a safer journey, so the reduced harm from road crashes, that's important. Reduce harm from slips, trips and falls, often where our data is not quite joined up, which I'll talk to, but important, massive numbers in that space. And that's international, not just within New Zealand data, but within New Zealand data as well. And reduce threats to personal security. Often an area where we don't join that up. We haven't gone into other wider harms like suicide on a transport network. Would love to include that as well longer term, but that wasn't part of our scope for the purposes of this work. So what did we do? We did what all good researchers do and look at what everyone else is doing overseas. But there was some really good New Zealand case studies as well within this. And then we did a stock take within that of what was sort of some of the best interventions and tried to succinctly summarize those. So there's some takeaways that are pretty easy for you to pick up on, as in we've done the hard work, the hard mahi, and you should be able to sort of shortcut via finding some of our studies or picking up on some of the recommendations. The case studies and interviews. Case studies were focused on Aotearoa New Zealand, and the intent of those is to just capture some of the good work we've done to share those lessons. So I know a lot of work has come through, especially in recent times where we're starting to get better at doing the monitoring, but that was sort of a requirement of the case study that we had some data to back up what was going on. And there's some quite cool examples in there. I'll take you through one today where we worked really closely with the really neat team up in Auckland Transport. Did 7 interviews with experts to give some local flavour, some national flavour, and some international flavour to what should we be doing, what could we be doing better in this space. And then we put it all together into some interventions and put in some recommendations at the end. So what could we be monitoring? There's a lot you can do given the budget. So some of the more recent work coming through when we looked internationally, AI cameras is a hot topic. I know that we've played with them in New Zealand as well, but others have probably progressed further in terms of whether it's funding or integration with existing systems. Example here, pictures beautifully, cyclists, pedestrians, motorbikes, cars, buses, all being captured by Transport for London. So that's AI-powered traffic sensors. Port Phillip in Australia have had a little play as well, lots of different countries. In this study, they piloted Transport for London, moved from 2 just to pilot it, and I think TfL studied it and found that 97% accuracy was the takeaway from their findings. So that's the technology is getting better around how we identify movement through places. And they went consequently on the basis of that, where they went from 2 up to 45 traffic sensors like these. This was primarily used for traffic counting and looking at have we increased numbers. Equally, you can use them for safety indicators as well. So near miss, time to collision indicators, and you can get some really good, richer data. So almost the data before the crash happens, once you start building up that near miss data. Again, it requires a lot of background hardware, storage of data, data processing, but that's a really neat technology that's coming through. We've got things like overseas police services on rail, where they're not only on the service, but they're also reporting real-time crime mapping. So it's split into incident type, so type of crime, location of crime, station in line. This example with the British Transport Police in the middle, that's one example. There's plenty of others around where we're starting to get better with our data. I think we put a lot of people on these services, but making it easier for them to capture, report that data, and then how do we integrate it back into other data sets around that side of things in terms of that crime assault data is really important to capture. But that was a good example from British Transport Police. Safety pin on the right. This one's a map. I love maps of data, geospatial data. So they had more than 75,000 points, and they had auditing of transport hubs, parks, public spaces, and the data got fed back to Delhi government, and that can inform how they improve areas. So this particular map looks at poor lighting, and obviously you have to make a call on what poor lighting is, but capturing that data, presenting that data, building it into your investment decisions around what you could be doing differently in environments is quite a powerful way of looking at things differently and getting, I guess, that crowdsourced quick data. And in terms of monitoring, sort of 4 focus areas came through from that. So improved access and integration of existing injury data. So at the moment, and there's a really good example by Glenn Curry over on the right, working with Auckland Transport, and it just shows it, right? You've got the CAS data showing a picture of what's happening, but the serious, the hospitalisation data that we have, but don't necessarily integrate into our design decisions. So for example, our CAS, our crash analysis system, presents data geospatially. It's really accessible. I know engineers within our company are using that all the time to help inform decisions. What if that was integrated in with hospital data as well? What if we could get that at a geospatial level? Imagine that. We would be putting pedestrian and cycle-only injuries up there next to vehicle injury data. At the moment, there's an imbalance or an inequity, if you like, in the data and how we see that data. It is there. We can't access it as easily or equally. It requires extra steps and more analytics. So how can we get better data is a really good challenge for us. And I don't think it's a new challenge. It's been around for a while, but it's an important one. Perception of safety data. We ask perception of safety data. It's getting better and better. OECD indicators are starting to look at perception of safety. So safety at night when I'm walking alone is a really good one that we're collecting. But making sure you're consistent when you're asking questions. And the survey-based data we looked at across our literature varies a lot. And being specific as well, like, is it safety around vehicle crashes? Is it safety around slip, trips and falls, which we generally don't ask? Is it safety around personal security? So asking the question in the same format is really important. Varies a lot at the moment. Getting some consistency means you can look at how things change over time, and also being specific with it. Camera-based AI data, already covered that, provides really rich data, really useful. Like, we've used it in a number of workshops, focus groups and things like that as well to actually have evidence-informed design meetings. So bringing that visual in rather than looking at numbers is also quite powerful. And then enabling better monitoring. So how do we encourage use of guidance that might be a little bit buried or in someone's head? Improved access to monitoring equipment. How do we know what works? What's the best use for us on our project? If it's a smaller project, do we really need to monitor? What could we get away with? Can you get away with just some survey-based data? Can you get away with just putting some speed count equipment out, which is the common one that we look at around safety? So how do we access the fund and link in monitoring, build monitoring into what we do? So those were areas of focus that I think are really important and worth further discussion in Mahi. A summary of intervention effectiveness. So we've split this into modes, but some of the interventions often carry across. So you'll see some duplication, but this was the simplified infographic takeaway from what should we do that's increasing safety and has the potential to lead to mode shift as well. So if you've got 3 of the icon, it's good, 2 is moderate, 1 is low. That's the simplicity of the infographic. So we put the higher ranked ones on the left and then going down. So you've got cycling, infrastructure that separates. We know separating modes helps. Speed limits, traffic calming, some of the good stuff that we're already doing, and we've got plenty of evidence to say that that is working. Cycling, for cycling, it's a no-brainer. It's the road safety side of things that is preventing us from shifting to that mode. Walking, a little bit more complicated, but some of the things coming through: safe routes to school, walking school buses, safe routes to transit, and I'll go into a couple of examples of what I mean by safe routes and complete packages is another term that we use in our report. Speed limits with traffic calming, a lot of the really good stuff we're doing around speed, the Safer Speeds program, and lighting as well is one that's tricky to get, but does have a really good effect if you can enable it. Public transport, again, safe routes to transit, real-time information. So things like providing the information makes the service better, but it also reduces your fear of waiting in a place dark and late. When is my service turning up? So minimizing your exposure to that when it is a negative environment. And then lighting as well comes through really strongly. So in terms of the evidence base, that's the short version. If you're going to do one thing to take away from the session, that would be it. Separated cycleways. So here's an example that was quite neat. from Seville in Spain, and you might be familiar with this one because it's received quite a lot of media attention, including I think in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Why did it get media attention? The bold changes that went ahead really quickly. So anecdotally, they were going to roll out 80 k's of cycleway separated and do it over 10 years. So 10 k's of cycleway, yeah, that seems reasonable. And the Manuel Calvo in charge says, we need to build this as a whole. We need to build it fast. So what did they do? They did have a phase of planning. There was a proper plan that went in behind it. But they built the first 77 k's of cycleway in 2 years, which is pretty impressive. And then had another planning phase, built up a complementary phase that they'd already worked through, but built that in as a secondary layer. So that took, again, another couple of years. And then they had other intervention programs that they rolled out, and amongst that, that identified sort of some of the pain points in the areas that were trickier. So over a very short timeline, almost 200 k's of cycle network got rolled out. So parking was removed. That's a huge barrier to what we do. And by moving fast, you can get there quicker, arguably. So a bit contentious in terms of how we could apply that to us. You got to take that in the context that we have. They added 2.5 metre wide bidirectional paths. They identified bidirectional as important to the quick rollout process. You could then change them later to move it to unidirectional once numbers started to come up, was seen as another benefit. Use of colour texture and separation. So colour texture was mainly used to separate from the pedestrian spaces, and physical separation like bollards was mainly used to separate from car. And what did we find? So this is where some of the data doesn't often get shared quite as succinctly as this. We found some pretty good findings around mode shift on the right-hand side. So 8.8% dropping in car, and then 3.9% increase, well, roughly about a 4% increase in both cycling and public transport use. Walking wasn't reported, unfortunately, in the data that we could find. Cycle injury rates, pretty nice drop there, 1.82 to 0.55 per 100,000 trips. Again, reporting it as trips, so not the pure exposure data. DSI and cyclists involved in a crash went from 10% down to 5.5%. Still, nevertheless, this isn't the perfect solution. It's not the glorious perfect solution. It is a great solution for mode shift because the quick speed with which they did it meant that a lot of the arguments we get around, we built that cycleway but no one's using it, get removed. A lot of people are waiting for a connected network. We need that, right? If you're going to really get the people that are just sort of the not hardcore cyclists to start joining your cycleway, then presenting a whole network approach, we know that is better if you could enable it. So but it doesn't get the tricky bits in the network necessarily covered. So crashes with motor vehicles was still the leading cause of injury. And again, intersection treatments possibly take a little bit longer to get right. And that's one of the areas where you'd need more work. So that post-treatment element. I might come back to questions at the end if that's okay for the people that are throwing in. Safe Routes to School. This is a really neat program. So I thought it was worth going into, and I was able to chat to one of the people in the interviews about this in more depth, which was really got some better insights from the program and how it worked as well. So this was led by the US Congress and a massive investment, a massive step change in investment to focus in on these sorts of changes. And and it stretched across 14,000 schools, which is a pretty neat size of investment. And location-wise, they're looking at neighbourhood treatments. So they're looking at not just at the school gate, but a little bit beyond as well, trying to connect into those residential environments, footpath treatments, cycleways, crossings, traffic calms, signage, low speed zones, stuff we know works. So there wasn't anything particularly innovative in the types of treatments they were rolling out, but I guess the size and breadth and the neighborhood-wide treatment scale of it was the thing that was important. The other bit that was quite interesting behind this one was starting to get into the education side. So within the funding scheme itself, 10 to 30% was earmarked for education or encouragement is what they called it. I think they had the 5 E's and went to the 7 E's. They added education and encouragement, so that public awareness campaign side of it as well. Getting the public support, getting the public buy-in was seen as really instrumental. And then within schools and also outside of schools, so real world safety programs, much like we have in Aotearoa New Zealand as well. We have some really neat cycles training on school and outside school classroom studies. So what was the result of doing all this good work? A really good increase in the rate of pedestrian injury. So this isn't just a pure percentage point, so we didn't have that within the study, but the 44% reduction in relative pedestrian injury for school-age pedestrians during school travel hours. So the numbers don't go up quite so well for the larger community across a larger bit of time. And then mode shift. So 71% relative increase, but a 13% point increase. And what I found really neat about this data is that they also looked at the data over time. So on the right-hand side, we're seeing before the treatment, we've got 18% walking as a mode share to school, and then we're going up to 31% at the end. But I guess you can see that it's not quick pickings. Even though we've put in the engineering treatments, we've started to do the education, it isn't going to happen perfectly instantly. So I think it's really neat graph to look at and consider around how we rate our investment over a long term. So it took up to 3 years to start seeing a bit of a trend upwards. So I think we don't often see that trend in the data we represent. So I think it's really important that we take that into account when we're looking at our data around mode shift interventions. Safe routes to parks. So I did a little bit of a look because I chatted to Charles, who was the author of that paper, and they've extended it to safe routes to parks USA as well. And I don't have any data, and I didn't report this in the report, but I thought it was just a neat thing to consider. What are our areas where we want to create safe routes? Safe routes to parks, safe routes to our marae, safe routes to our important social infrastructure, our community centres. So it just shows that there are natural extensions to the really core safety interventions that we know work, that can get rolled out if we build the right partnerships. So they talk through on this website, saferoutespartnership.org, a lot of the process for unlocking and what they did and some of the theory behind how they got the partnerships working, how they incentivized the partners and how they funded the partners. So I think we could learn some things from that type of investment and funding pathway. So that's the reason I've pointed to that. I think they also had safe routes to healthy food was one of the other rollouts that they were trying to work on next. Safe routes to transit. So this is a really neat one in San Francisco, California. Again, larger scale, looking at sort of a more wider area network again. So they targeted 7 rapid transit stations, pedestrian plazas, bridges. Often bridges are where we fall down, like a big investment, right? Intersection treatments, secure bicycle storage, cycle paths, removal of pedestrian bicycle barriers near transit stations, lighting improvements, again, another one where it's tricky, the bus shelters, benches, and real-time information, things that we really know work at our stops. Bus bulbs or bus borders, for those that aren't experts like Lorelei on the call, extensions that align with the bus stop and the parking lane, so extending out across where the park was and removing parking. So a lot of work got done around those, the walk up to the transit stations. 1 in 10 cyclists felt safer, so it was subjective assessment by Weinzimmer and our that we found. I did find some other work where there were some sort of other indicators where people observed things like jaywalking decreased, and that's the graphic on the right hand. So before treatment, and the light blue and the dark blue is after treatment. So you do get some observations of people being more compliant with formal crossings. So some of that good work around the pedestrian environment was leading to safer behaviours in pedestrians as well. That didn't translate through to safer perceptions in the study. That was cyclists only. But we were seeing some better walking behaviours or fewer interactions with cars. Just didn't have the data to pull on to actually give you some numbers here for that one. Mode shift. So we're getting 3.1 percentage points. So this isn't relative change. This is the real mode shift change in walking. 2.5% increase in bus. Negative 2.5% decrease in car usage. And they also had some interesting indicators around economics. So the people that were walking and biking were more likely to grab food and drink on their walk up to the transit station. So there are some economic benefits out of this as well, which was beyond the scope of the report. But if anyone's interested, that study is a good example. Safe routes to transit in Ruse, Bulgaria. Hope I didn't mispronounce that. So again, new crossings on raised platforms, separated cycleways is a bit of a theme here. Improved LED lighting. So this is where this one I think is a neat example where they've tried to look at the nighttime environment a little bit as well. Video surveillance, they're bringing that in as well. Park and ride facilities, and the bottom right pictures are the Good Night trolley bus. So they did quite a bit of comms and marketing to encourage around operational improvements to late night running services as well. There's no safety impact recorded within this work, but there was some mode shift impact. So 20% drop in car, increase in walking and cycling 15, and increase in public transport of 20% were reported in that particular study. So the key bit with showing that one was really that nighttime intervention. So if you're looking at nighttime environment, that's another good one to look at. Following on our theme on nighttime and lighting. So there was a really neat couple of, there's a neat meta-analysis by Farrington and Welsh in our paper that looked at some US sites, and then it looked at some more recent UK sites where lighting had been improved. So within these studies, there was overall a 32% reduction in crime, but it's a little bit more complicated than just going, oh, that lighting will solve everything. So I'll go into that a little bit. There was a 30% increase in pedestrian trips. Great. That was work in the UK that looked at footfall, and that actually had a really massive sample attached to it. 91% less fearful of crime. So if we can integrate lighting with our solutions, it does have an impact. However, the reduction in crime and the findings around feeling safer and footfall were also linked to more stable, active communities. So in places where people were calling out and wanted change, and wanted to be walking at night, wanted to be using these spaces, that's where it was effective. So that's something to take into account. And I recommend you look at if you are interested in that lighting space, it's a really good section in the report on that. Recommend you look there. I don't have enough time to go into it right now. But there's also some neat stuff around why is lighting important to us, and looking at moving beyond lighting just for streets, but lighting for people. So how can we improve equity of lighting as well? Get it for all modes. Facial detection becomes really important in relation to this. So seeing people's faces, that relates to approachability. We read emotion in other people. We want to make eye contact to see that the other person's going to move out of our way. We want to make sure our eye contact is appropriate, not too long, just right, because that can indicate whether what someone's intentions are. So seeing that that facial recognition starts to come in at that 8 to 10 meter space. And then in terms of social comfort and our ability to fight or flight, if you like, recommended guidance comes in, say, more like a 15 meter space. So seeing people seeing their movements, seeing their body language, seeing their faces all becomes really important to how we feel about being safe in a nighttime environment. But the takeaway on that one, if you have nothing else, is that you can't just add lighting and expect everything to change. You need to follow good set process, and you need to have great community support and community dialogue. Those are where the lighting interventions activate well. Neighbourhood accessibility planning. This was one we found quite late in the process, even though it's a really good study. Really neat work done in Nelson. So we didn't include this in our case studies, but we did include it in the research. This was a complete package approach. Again, it's looking at not just engineering, but education as well. So on the right-hand side, you see some of the treatments. So we're looking at lighting, cycle lanes, advanced stop boxes, cycle paths, sheltered cycle parking, speed tables, all really good stuff. One of the interesting bits, I guess, was the education and communications that went alongside it. So education on shared slow zones and looking for bikes and cars. We've got, I don't know if you can see it very well, but the person in the snail outfit, and they had some comms material that went alongside this. They had cycle design courses for engineers. That's probably where they're instigated in Aotearoa. I'm not sure if anyone on the call knows if those are still running. I think they are from places like Via Strata. Community liaison advisor for Safe City was set up temporarily. So that idea of that Safe City advisor role, trying to pull together the knowledge around what would work, pull together the education and the campaign and have some responsibility or ownership of that. And what did it do? We've got some great outcome numbers there. 22% increase in pedestrian volume in CBD, reductions in reported crime. I don't think that was assaults. I think that was a reduction in disorder and willful damage type events. And then pedestrian and cyclist crash reduction. So 16 per annum in the pre-period to 1 per annum in the post. So that was the international and one good New Zealand Kiwi example. We've got 5 really good New Zealand case studies that, again, if you like this stuff, then go to the report to get the detail. But I'll go through one of them today. This is a neat mix in terms of Christchurch, Wellington, Auckland, so it is big cities focused. But it's a neat mix of Safe Speeds program, our innovative streets program with the tactical urbanism that's going on at the moment, and our really good urban cycleways program as well. So it's a neat mix of what's happening, and there's more. If you go to each of those programs, there's more resources around. But one of the ones that we went into, and we were very thankful for the time and interest of Auckland Transport in helping us, was looking at the Safer Speeds program as in a residential location. So timing for some of this stuff has been interesting with our fun COVID environment, but they did some really neat work pulling together different data sets to establish what had worked around, again, what we know are good treatments. So what got put in place you've got the image on the left-hand side, nice wide street, not much going on, through to some good engineering interventions in the middle. So we've got speed bumps, speed table, signage, traffic calming measures put in, safe hit posts, etc. And then through to June when we put a speed limit reduction in. And it was done in a case-controlled neighbourhood setting. So the top blue side is a similar neighbourhood within the same area. It's got one main street separating it with Beach Road. And then our actual treatment zone is in the green at the bottom. So relatively similar in terms of, as best we could do, in terms of similar type of person, location in terms of context in relation to other amenity, similar numbers of bus stops, etc. So what did we find? In terms of perception, they did a really good post-evaluation perception survey was run. So in perception findings on the right-hand side. So in terms of perceived safety, 76% overall felt safer with the measurements in place. In terms of observed data, there was a 12K speed drop within the area as well, compared to the case controlled area. That was significant. The mode shift, so bus patronage recovery, remembering we're in post or in the mix of COVID and non-COVID environments. So we used bus patronage recovery as an indicator, and relative to the control environment, there was a 20% increase in bus patronage. Also, the AADT dropped, so that in the table in the bottom right-hand side, it's 47% difference. So AADT in the treatment location was 17% down, and then in the comparison location, it happened to go up 30% during our timing of collecting the data. Overall on the right-hand side, so again, perceptions go up. So 44% of people were saying at least one active mode more. So primarily walking when you look at the breakdown of that. And if there's anyone on the call that's part of that evaluation team, I'm sure they can be happy to answer the questions in more depth than me, perhaps. Overall, the case study lessons from Aotearoa New Zealand, context is important. We did find variations in even the same treatments. So the Rosehill example just provided, base patronage recovery was significant in one neighbourhood, but not another. So things like the context of having a lot of schools in the zone, for example, did make a difference, we think. Progressive change is still an improvement over no change. So all of our temporary works, overall, they're fantastic, and they bring the community on board, which we know from doing that work already. But again, importance, how do we get that shift or enable the shift from temporary to permanent is really important as well. So making sure we're funding all the way through. Once we've established the temporary, can we move to the permanent, which I think a lot of good work's been done through that. And community consultation, again, it's really known but important to restate. It does unlock commitment. So if you really want to get people on board, then these types of works are really effective. Making sure community consultation goes alongside it is critical. So it's a bit of a theme. We ran 7 expert interviews. So again, looking at the local regional context at a national strategic level and international insights. There's a lot of really good quotes and insights in the report, but some of the priority, we built it into 3 themes you've got here. So priority areas, lessons, and enabling change. So mode separation, we know that works. Filling gaps in the network, those hard to reach places like the bridges or main highways where we've got gaps, and getting past those to complete the network, really important. Enhancing the walk up to public transport. And also a thing that came through, perhaps flavoured by the environment we live in now, but our neighbourhood trips are becoming more important to us. So what are the key attractions in your neighbourhood? How are people able to access them, whatever they are? So what are people using regularly, and how can you improve access in a multimodal way? How do you make that safer? Appropriate maximum speeds. Lessons, monitoring, and more monitoring, which I drink to that. Actioning monitoring plans was one thing that came up. There were a lot of frameworks and plans that was in the documentation to the project, but actually when it came to doing the monitoring, there was a lack. So connecting the plan, who is responsible, who is checking that the plan has been actioned and the data is being collected at the right time. Because when we're doing these quick engineering projects and we're building and constructing, you need to allow time for those monitoring activities as well. Better use of emerging real-time data. So whether that's the NEMIS data I talked about earlier, whether it's data from vehicles and cell phones, we're getting better data insights all the time. So starting to bring those into how do we integrate those with our existing data that we've been using for years and years. Enabling change, Road to Zero was seen really positively within the New Zealand interviewees. Wider injury data, so it's sort of something I tapped on before. Equity around how we look and invest around injury data. So bring in the other data around walking and cycle-only injuries. How can we bring in data around crime and assaults to inform our investment decisions is a bigger question as well. One of the neat concepts that came through, again, there's a lot of it that came through in terms of equity and how people walk and road safety from the US work. The schools that were funded within the Safer Schools programs were primarily lower income or lower decile areas because that's where the injuries were. So twice as many injuries were occurring in lower decile, if you like, locations. So that's where the funding was targeted first. And social justice around vulnerable is a useful mechanism for getting funding. So thinking about the children, that's a vulnerable group on our roads, on our streets. How do we get the funding? We anchor into those things. Who are our vulnerable groups? Who needs our support? The disability sector as well came through, and elderly came through. But the one where funding was seemed to be enabled consistently was around that schools thing. So if you're looking at an area where you can identify who is vulnerable in a space, who is vulnerable in terms of that safety space, and putting that angle on it to get momentum was really effective as an enabler in terms of that funding space. We know it's the right thing to do around the data, but to unlock the funding and to get the support for these types of bigger programs that were seen as really important. And building in evaluation was again recommended. So we're almost at the point here now. I know it's been a while to get through, but strategic level recommendations. So can we include in our future transport strategies a wider range of harms? So road safety, slip, trips and falls, personal security as our start point for what we call a safer journey. And how do we invest? How do we fund? How do we make policy decisions around that? Another thing that came through was so the funding around it, that whole of journey safety. So getting from point A to point B, it seems like a very low-hanging fruit thing. Like I should be able to get out the door. I should be able to make it to my workplace without suffering injury or harm. Including and within this a complete funding or safe routes approach. So how do we unlock some of that really good stuff that's done overseas? The really good stuff that got done with that Nelson example, where a bigger funding portfolio was linked in. The model cities work over in Taranaki and Hawke's Bay as well is a really good example of a bigger funding pot that got put together. So how do we unlock those bigger scale projects in a smarter way around where the harm is occurring? Walking and micromobility, so getting into those single party injury interventions. So where it is just the individual alone that's falling off or colliding with an object, not necessarily car-based crashes. Interventions that also work for mode shift on the safety intervention list. So road to zero, how do we bring in more of that good stuff around cycle separation as one of the interventions in the safety toolkit, for example. Getting more of those types of interventions and that also unlock those mode shift benefits. So you're getting a twofer. Linking street and corridor infrastructure rollout with educational initiatives. So we're doing some of this, but where can we do this better? So bikes in schools is a really good example. Where could we extend from and build on that? So walking school bus, individual travel plans, those sorts of good things. In terms of safety interventions, I won't harp on about this one, just reminding you again, those are good. And criteria for accessing funds. So I've probably gone on about funding and monitoring, but that was a key theme through all of the work and how do we unlock some of the better work and the larger scale stuff? How do we do what we know is good? accessing the funds, including minimum requirements. So having milestones set around monitoring, for example, funding documents and national and regional monitoring frameworks. So can we put explicit links to the evaluation that we want to go alongside those right into that document? How can we promote what we know is good evaluation and monitoring? And I've got a couple of examples on the right-hand side. I think the Urban Cycleways program has worked through a lot of the challenges around getting monitoring as a component of the rollout of the infrastructure. So there's some really good lessons buried in amongst that we could pick up on in other contexts. And there's some really good, again, explicit guidance around what we could monitor. So I've just got a couple of screen caps from the cycle network guidance. If we could do that for other modes as well, wouldn't that be a fantastic space to be in? Top 5 for monitoring, I think I've gone through this already, so I don't need to go through it too much more now, but can we get our walking and cycling count data up? Think about where we could put that data strategically. I think there is a really good rollout. Possibly we're more cycling heavy at the moment, get some more walking in there as well. Improving access to monitoring equipment and analytic capability. So if we are going to truly upgrade to AI and camera-based things, we need to have the people that can do it, and the hardware and the data storage and the processing power. So that requires a bit more investment than what we have currently put into that. So that would require an injection of something a bit different from what we're doing now as a status quo. I think, as far as I'm aware of what's going on and what I'm seeing from this study anyway. There's probably projects in line that are in stream, but you don't often see it come through into reported, evaluated data. Consistent monitoring of specific perceived safety indicators. I chatted to that before, splitting it out into the different types of safety. Continuing to provide more good case studies like some of the ones that are in this report. So the more we do this, the more we share, the more monitoring will get done, the more the good insights from the really good mahi we're doing out on our streets at the moment can get shared and utilised, and we can do better. And continuing to focus on that transport safety data integration. So it's not easy, but getting geographically integrated data is really powerful in terms of changing how we fund, invest, which interventions we provide to make Aotearoa New Zealand safer for everyone. And you can get the report. And thanks again to everyone who helped support this research and the research team that worked on it.
Well, thank you, Jared, very much for a very informative presentation. And it was about 50 minutes long. If this was a football match, you'd be getting 15 minutes half time now, but I'm afraid that's not available. I'm going to stop recording and we'll go to the